Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I hope you're going to go and get yourself a lovely warm cup of cocoa, coffee, or whatever it is that you like drinking, and if it's something unusual, let me know about it. But we are going on to part 2 of our story tonight, so if you haven't heard part 1, definitely click on the description because you don't want to miss out on the whole story. And let's get started with part 2 of our story. Mrs. Ashbluff believed unequivocally that she could have helped her daughter Kirsten, but not knowing what was going on in her daughter's head meant she could not be the anchor that Kirsten badly needed. Something had made her daughter become unhinged of late. Why would a photograph cause her to try and end her life? It seemed nonsensical, ridiculous, outlandish to attempt to take your own life over a photograph of all things. But Mrs. Ashbluff knew that teenagers were more predisposed to doing irrational things like this when they became overwhelmed with the issues of life, of which they were afraid that there was no escape. Let's not kid, life can be tough at the very best of times, especially to someone as impressionable and as sensitive as Kirsten. 24 hours later, her daughter woke up in the hospital bed, surrounded by the loving members of her family. Her stomach had been pumped, and her attempts to slash her wrists had not been very successful, so she was on her way to making a full and complete recovery. She looked at her mother bashfully. "I'm so sorry, Mum." "Why, Kirsten? Why? I need to understand why you would do this. Do you know this is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me? If I lost you, I don't know what I would do with myself. Why would you do this, Kirsten? Why would you do this to yourself? Why would you do this to us?" "I just wanted to make friends, Mum, at school. I did something really silly. Everybody was sniggering at me behind my back, calling me all kinds of nasty names. I just couldn't take it anymore, Mum. It was the only way out." "Now you listen to me, Kirsten, and you listen to me hard. There's always a way out. Always. If things overwhelm you, there is an escape, but you need to talk to me. I'll always help you. Involve me in your life, for goodness sake. I'm your mother. That's what I do. That's what I'm there for. I would move hell and high water to keep you safe. But if you don't tell me what's going on, how will I ever be able to help you? I need you to promise me that you will never, ever do something like this again. We love you, Kirsten. If you weren't here, it would break my heart. You are my beautiful, beautiful girl, and I love you so much." "Mum's right," said my brother Braden. "If I didn't have you around, there wouldn't be anyone to tease. But really, sis, if you need me to fight your corner, I always will. I'll personally go and speak to anyone giving you a hard time. But don't you ever do this again." "I'm so sorry, Mum. I'm sorry, Braden. And tell Daddy I'm sorry as well. You're right. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm actually glad to still be here." Kirsten's account. In the beginning, I'd been very happy to move to the Colorado countryside, especially when I saw the exquisite farmhouse where we were going to live. I knew I would have the quintessential opportunity to own my own horse, and what in the world could be better than that? Naturally, I was desperately sad to leave behind my friends and my old school, but my mother was sufficiently confident that I would make brand new friends. The best thing about the move was rescuing Sunbeam. When I saw her dreadful condition in the newspaper, I knew I had to do something about her. I couldn't believe that a local man, not liked by many, had starved that horse half to death. When the shelter visited his farm, there were dead animals lying everywhere, carcasses and bones of neglect lying on the grass, all victims of his cruel, despicable and unkind neglect. There was an old dog chained to a metal railing, with only the ribs showing, looking like the most sorrowful sight that you have ever seen in your life. In the picture he looked exceedingly old, very frail, but I was to find out he was only a year old. I'm glad to say that the dog found a new loving home and fully recovered, I would have gladly rescued him as well. The man was a monster of the worst kind, and thank God he was arrested. The worst thing about the raid on his farm is that this man had barns and barns stashed with food. There was no need for any of the animals to have gone hungry. I think the animals were victims of his indifference and sheer laziness. If he didn't want to feed the animals, why didn't he hire a farmhand to help him out? He was not short of a bob or two. I honestly do not know why he didn't feed his animals, but I'm very glad he was arrested and charged. He's never allowed to own animals again. The shelter was about to put down poor little Sunbeam as an act of mercy, but I begged them to let me take care of him. In truth, they thought he would last only the night, but I knew in my heart he would pull through. I don't know why I knew this, but I did. I felt as if I was meant to save him. He was a young horse. He didn't deserve to have his life cut short. The moment I saw him, I connected with him. Our eyes met, and I could see a deep sadness in their depths, but I also knew he didn't want to die. "You cannot put him down. You absolutely can't," I insisted. "He doesn't want to die. I know he doesn't. And I can help him, and I will." And I did help him. And despite their doubts, Sunbeam made a full and awesome recovery. When I sent the shelter a picture of him, they couldn't believe it was the same horse. They were astonished. There was no doubt he was a remarkably good-looking horse. "You did well," the shelter told me. "He looks incredible." I might have saved Sunbeam, but in truth he saved me from the darkness that had descended over my life, that was so thick and murky, it was hard to see any light. I had never been a confident person, at the very best of times, so when I started at my brand new school, I shrank away from the people in my class, and no one made any effort to befriend me. On the contrary, people went out of their way to be terribly mean towards me, possibly because they could. I let them. I was the despised doormat that they could tread all over and snigger about. Some of the girls would call me insulting names. They'd whisper about me behind my back and giggle. The boys weren't spiteful or catty like that towards me, but they just didn't want to get involved. They turned a convenient blind eye to what was going on. It got significantly worse when a couple of the popular girls in our class began to bully me. The trouble is that when cool girls in school make fun of you, everybody follows their lead to keep in with the hip crowd, as people all want to be liked and accepted. I was a fool, as I didn't stand up for myself in the way Braden would have done. If he had been wearing my shoes, he'd have mown down those bullies in a heartbeat with his sharp words. No one would have dared upset him again. My brother would have gained respect at once. He would not put up with any nonsense, which is why it's so easy for him to make tons of friends. I've seen Braden march up to a boy once who said something mean to him, and he said, "What's your problem? Are you looking for a fight? Because if you are, don't tempt me. Believe me, friend, this is a fight that you can't win." Braden can be very assertive, so no one dares challenge him. In truth, he's a peacemaker who loathes any kind of conflict. I wasn't like Braden. I lacked his ballsy personality. Instead, I crawled further and further and further into my shell. I felt so lonely, so isolated, as nobody wanted to be my friend. But there was one girl who started to become friendly with me, but she was also one of the kids on the outside that was always being bullied. So it was obvious for the two unpopular kids in class to naturally become friends. She knew I liked one of the boys, who she believed had a secret crush on me. She suggested I should send him a topless picture of myself. At first the idea absolutely horrified me. I thought it would be a vulgar, tasteless thing to do. But it's amazing the path that desperation can lead you down. The desire to be liked and accepted, welcomed into the fold, almost consumed my life. "If he likes you," my friend had said, "you will go out together. Then everybody will like you. Then maybe you can persuade the cool kids in class to like me too. So we'll no longer be outsiders, but part of the cool group." I knew that everyone in my class liked Fletcher Kester, whom I knew had a secret crush on me. You know things like that. You feel them. He was a popular boy in school. He was handsome too, with blonde hair that seemed to dance around his honey-coloured skin in natural curly waves. He had a perfectly symmetrical face, and the bluest eyes I'd ever seen, that in some lights almost became a silver grey. He was also a star on the sports field, so if I was to become his girlfriend and hung around him, I would soon be accepted by everyone. I'd seen him giving me several shy, rather approving glances, and smiling at me a couple of times. I could see he was desperately shy, not the assertive type like my brother, but he did have a modest confidence about him. I really liked him, and I knew the feeling was mutual. There was this silent connection between the two of us that I felt from the word go. I knew he was unlikely to make the first move in asking me out, so I presumed the ball was in my court. If everybody saw him giving me attention, the bullies would go away. They'd leave me alone. They'd be silenced, and I wanted that more than anything else in the entire world. So Fletcher received an intimate, personal picture, for his eyes only. I thought he'd know I really liked him, and then he might find the courage to ask me out. I was so tired of feeling like a fish out of water. I wanted to be welcomed at my new school, for people to naturally like me. My brother was having a roaring time at school. He was popular and had tons and tons of friends, but not me. I took the topless picture of myself in an attractive lighting. The picture looked really good, like something you might see in a glossy magazine. I was quite proud of myself for my accomplishments, but worried that I looked cheap. I felt a little uncomfortable doing what I was doing. It didn't seem natural, and seemed ridiculously silly. But as I told you, I was desperate. Looking back, it was a pathetic thing to do. I showed the picture to my friend, who encouraged me at once to send it to Fletcher. "It's fantastic! He's going to love it," she said. I sat there in the geography class, with my finger on my cell phone, plucking up the courage to send it to him. And I chickened out on numerous occasions, until finally I closed my eyes really tight and clicked the send button. I glanced over at Fletcher after I'd sent him my picture. He looked visibly shocked to receive a topless photograph of me in the middle of a geography class, when the teacher was talking about how hot the equator was. Fletcher raised his hand up rather cheekily in class, giving me a cute wink, saying, "Mrs. Lennox, there are some things way hotter than the equator, you know." "You're right about that, Fletcher," said Mrs. Lennox. "I'm glad you pointed that out. The air temperature in the tropics is 42 degrees Celsius, which is greater than the equator, which is 30 degrees. This is why the tropical regions are hotter than the equator. For example, the Sahara Desert is the largest hot desert on the planet. It's located in the tropics, away from the equator. Well done, Fletcher. I'm very impressed that you made this point. It's very observant of you." In the beginning, when Fletcher had actually received my picture, his shocked reaction certainly grabbed his friend's attention. "What is it, bro?" his friend asked curiously. "Nothing," he said. Fletcher was looking up at me. He gave me a wink and a thumbs up. I was so pleased he liked my photograph. He sent me a response. "You're far hotter than the equator. I really like you. We must go out for a milkshake sometime. But you didn't need to send me your photograph. I liked you already. I'll delete it before anybody sees it." I was so happy my friend's plan was working. Then everything went so badly wrong. My heart sank. All of a sudden my worst fears were confirmed when Fletcher's friend snatched his cell phone from him to see what was going on. He knew Fletcher had seen something interesting on his cell phone based on his reaction and wanted to see it for himself. "Give me my cell phone back," said Fletcher, running after his friend, who on seeing the photograph grinned like a Cheshire cat. "Oh my word, look what we got here!" He then clicked all the buttons and sent the picture to everyone in our class. All at once everybody's cell phones were pinging, and there were shocked faces and giggles and smirks as everyone turned around to look directly at me. There were a plethora of expressions on people's faces, from disgust to pity to humour. Fletcher was mouthing to me, "I'm sorry." His face had gone a beetroot red colour. I remember going to my locker to retrieve something. I heard some of the girls sniggering about me behind my back. "I knew she was a slapper. That girl is a slapper. She sent a filthy picture of herself to Fletcher. completely topless. I mean, talk about desperate, throwing yourself at him like that. What a little tart. I can't believe she had the audacity to do such a thing. Talk about brass nerve. She ought to be standing on a street corner, selling her body, said somebody else. Oh, she's a real hussy. You mean she's a whore? She's a whore, that's what I say. The tears spilled down my cheeks, and they didn't stop, especially when I heard and read all the nasty things being written about me on social media. It was brutal. Thankfully, Fletcher managed to get his friend to delete the picture, but by then everybody in my class had seen it. The damage was done. I felt so humiliated. I wanted the ground to swallow me up whole. There was no way I could go back to school again, not after this. When I returned home that day, I went to say goodbye to my beautiful horse Sunbeam. I didn't want to say goodbye to him. I was very emotional. Goodbye, Sunbeam. There's no other way. I have to leave. He nuzzled me so affectionately. I cried in his mane until it was saturated with my tears. I felt like a real coward, knowing that I was ending things, and against all the odds, Sunbeam had pulled through to fight another day. And if he could do it, so could I. I almost felt as if Sunbeam was telling me to hold on for a little longer, that everything would work itself out in the end. Part of me knew the horse was right. The truth is, the bullying online was so hurtful, I just couldn't deal with it. I'm not sure why I didn't think to write a suicide note to my parents, but it never occurred to me. I went straight to the bathroom, ran a bath, swallowed a whole bunch of pills, and began to cut my wrists. It wasn't an easy thing to do. I was scared to die, but far more afraid to live. So no one was more surprised than I was to wake up in a hospital bed, still very much alive, after my stomach had been pumped and my wounds attended to. I was unable to believe that I was actually alive, but I was pleased that I wasn't dead. It felt good to be able to tell my mother everything that had happened. She was actually very shocked that I would send a topless photograph of myself to a boy in class, just so that he might like me, and in turn persuade others to like me too. On reflection, it was a ludicrous thing for me to have to do. It made me look exceedingly desperate, but then again I was desperate, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. My brother told me I should have stood up for myself. He gave me some pointers on what I should say next time that somebody was mean to me. You need to stand up for yourself, sis. You need to open up that mouth of yours and speak out. Otherwise, people take advantage of you. They can be cruel. You can't afford to be timorous at school. Your brother's absolutely right, my mother had told me. Next time someone tries to belittle you, play them at their own game. If they tell you you're a slut, you turn around and say, well, what are you then, when such filth comes out of your mouth? If I'm a slut, you're a public sewer, and you can't get worse than that, can you? At least a slut can clean up their act. But a public sewer, no, you can't ever clean that up. It remains filthy for generations. I knew my mother was right, but it was easier said than done. I spent the next month at home recuperating from my emotional turmoil and internal demons, as my therapist advised me to take a respite from school for a while. So I was doing schoolwork at home, receiving counselling from him. He came to talk to me about my suicide attempt. At first I was hesitant to talk to him about it, but he was a great listener and helped me to see that running away from life was not the answer, and that problems can easily be addressed and fixed, and there is a way out, but it's important to go to someone who will listen and help you. He encouraged me to go riding in the countryside and walking a lot in nature. I took his sagacious advice to heart. In my experience, young lady, nothing heals the raw wounds of a troubled heart more than the natural world. You can talk to the trees and the plants. They'll listen to you. Do you know everything has an energy signature on it? Even your nightstand has one, but plants and trees, they feel. If I were you, I would spend some quality time with Sunbeam, your horse. You helped him get better. I'm quite sure he wants to help you too. One day I got the surprise of my life when my mother told me I had an unexpected visitor. I was surprised to see it was Fletcher. I remember walking into the kitchen where my mother had poured Fletcher a large glass of lemonade. He was looking at me a little shyly, sitting there at the breakfast nook. My mother made her excuses and left the kitchen so that we were left together in peace. I bet you didn't expect to see me, did you? Let me tell you, it took a lot of courage for me to come and see you. But I knew I needed to see you. It hasn't been the same without you in class. You always made the class a much prettier place, if you don't mind my saying. It's good to see you. I didn't expect to see you here, Fletcher, I said, climbing into the seat of the breakfast nook opposite him, feeling ever so slightly nervous that he'd paid me this fleeting visit, while my heart was doing flip-flops. I really liked Fletcher. It was good to see him. Furthermore, he was being so charming. I felt comfortable talking to him. My shyness dissipated. I heard what you did. Much like everything at school, the news went around like wildfire. Nothing is kept secret for very long. I was devastated when I heard the news. Why did you do it? Try to kill yourself? That's insane. You've got so much to live for. It didn't feel like it at the time. Everybody was calling me a slut, a slapper, a tart, a whore. Nasty names after I sent you that photograph. Why did you send me that picture? I don't get it. I began to flush with embarrassment. It was Deborah Paniston's idea. She thought you'd like me if I sent you a topless picture of myself. Fletcher broke out into a broad grin. Oh, that's hilarious. So sending me a topless picture is going to make me like you more. I don't think so. I'm a bit deeper than that, I'd like to think, Kirsten. I may be a teenager, but I'm not shallow. If you must know, I liked you from the very beginning. You were different to the other girls. Some of them have got filthy mouths on them that need to be cleaned out with soap and salty water. You were sweet and cute from the very beginning. If you must know, I was going to pluck up the courage to actually ask you out before you sent me that photograph. Let's just say in a school like ours, full of prying busybodies, it's always a risk sending a topless picture to anyone, even if you trust someone. It's never worth the risk. I was going to delete it, but that friend of mine, as you know, grabbed it and unfortunately sent it to everyone. Now, I like Paul very much, but he can be so immature and childish at times. What he did was disgusting, but I'm glad to say he regrets it now. I'm sorry that picture got out. People can be cruel, and they said some brutal, unkind things about you, but you should never care what other people think. My grandfather taught me that a long time ago. He always said, quit caring about what other people think. It'll consume your life, and it's really not important. It's easier said than done, Fletcher, I'd said. It's hard not to care when people are being mean to you. You might not understand that, because you've always been popular. Well, I hope you're going to come back to school. I think you'll find, Kirsten, that the people's attitudes have changed significantly. I had words with everyone in class myself, and so did the headmistress for that matter. She came to the class and fed them the riot act. I've never seen so many bashful faces in all my life. What's wrong with you? She screamed. Why are you so vicious? A young girl nearly killed herself last night because of the unkindness in your hearts. If she hadn't pulled through, how many of you here today would have blood on your hands? I'm ashamed to consider some of you pupils in my school. And when that girl returns to our school, if ever I get a sniffle, if ever one of you says a single mean thing about her, I will not hesitate to get you suspended from school indefinitely. Do you hear me? Yes, yes. She said that. She did. And what did you tell the class? What did I say? Yes, what did you say? Well, I told some of the girls they needed to wash out their filthy mouths with salt and water, that they should be ashamed of their spiteful tongues. They might just rot their teeth. So they haven't been saying mean things about me anymore? Well, if they do, they'll have me to deal with as well, not just a surly headmistress, who means every word she says, let me tell you. That woman doesn't suffer fools gladly. She's livid with some of the pupils. When she gave them that speech in class, I could swear her nostrils were actually flaring. For me personally, I won't tolerate anyone saying anything bad about you. I've got your back from now on. So will you please come back to school, please? I think you'll find people will be reaching out to you. I'll think about it, I said. You do that. Give me a call if you want a milkshake in town sometime. I'd love to take you out. He paused for a moment suddenly, becoming quite shy. I really like you, Kirsten. I mean, really like you. And it has nothing to do with the picture you sent me. I'll see myself out now. When Fletcher left, I was touched to the quick. I couldn't believe how kind he'd been. I was already beginning to feel much better, and the prospect of returning to school didn't seem quite so daunting. It was almost as if the bad weather of my life had lifted, and there was a glimmer of sunshine beckoning to me. What a lovely boy, said my mother, coming into the kitchen with a warm smile. He really seems to like you a lot. What did he have to say? He was the one that I sent the topless photograph to, that got sent to everybody in the classroom. He was telling me to come back to school, that I was missed, and that he'd have my back if anyone dared say anything nasty to me. He said I should never have sent that picture to him, that he liked me already, and that he wasn't as shallow as that. This from a 16-year-old boy? My word, I am impressed. You've got a keeper there. You certainly have. He wants to have a milkshake with me in town sometime. Well, what are you waiting for, sweetheart? Get phoning him for that milkshake date. Don't just look a gift horse in the mouth. You need to make that date. Boys like him don't grow on trees, you know. I grinned happily at my mother. I'm just going to take Sunbeam for a ride, I told her. It was a beautiful day when I took Sunbeam for his ride in the countryside. Sunbeam and I were incredibly close these days. We seemed to understand each other. I knew he sensed I'd recently been through a rough time. He commiserated with me. When I walked over towards him with the reins and saddled him up, he seemed thrilled we were going for a ride together. We'd both been through the dark night of the soul together, so that sealed our bond all the more. Horses can be remarkably intuitive. He nuzzled me affectionately, staring at me through his dark, spirited eyes, with such a gentle, affectionate kindness. My father could not ride Sunbeam. Any time a man came near him, he would react with fear. My father had managed to win him around slowly and surely, but I doubted he'd ever be able to ride Sunbeam. He had been abused by that man, so it was understandable he wanted nothing more to do with men. But I was hoping he would soon see that not all men are woven from the same cloth. Before long, Sunbeam and I were galloping outside our farm, riding down a country lane, a well-known horse-riding trail. The sky was a cornflower blue. There was a splattering of fluffy clouds soaring above my head. There was a gentle wind blowing, and the trees jiggled in the breeze, while the sound of the pretty bird-song chirruped through the valley. It was just me and Sunbeam together, trotting down the country roads. It was absolutely gorgeous. Sunbeam's dark coat gleamed in the morning sun. I stroked the mane between the ears as we trotted under the radiant light of a cheerful day. I could smell wild flowers mingled with moss on the wind, and I saw a couple of bald eagles soaring above us in the sky. It felt so good to be alive. We'd been trotting for quite some time, when Sunbeam seemed to smell something on the wind that he appreciated. He seemed to like the scent, and be somewhat familiar with it. He was eager to take a left-hand turn on the hiking trail. I was intent on taking a right, but I thought, what the hell? I allowed him to dictate the ride, as he seemed doggedly determined to take that route. I'd never seen him so persistent before, so I obliged his choice. The paths along the trail became considerably more narrow, as tall, lofty trees brushed against my clothes. All of a sudden, Sunbeam stopped in his tracks, refusing to go any further, and when I tried to turn him around to go back from whence we'd come, he remained rigidly stiff and unyielding. I got the sense he was waiting for something or someone. But who? It turned out we didn't have to wait for terribly long. Sunbeam let out a neigh, and then I heard the sound of Sunbeam's own neigh, returning to him on the wind. Was there another horse in our midst, I wondered? Is that why Sunbeam had brought me here? I could hear feet crunching forest debris, and that was when I saw her. I was seated in my saddle, when this idiosyncratic creature hurried over to Sunbeam, almost oblivious to me for a brief moment. I knew at once why Sunbeam had brought me here. He wanted to see his friend. He was obviously very well acquainted with this creature. Seeing the creature up close and personal was like seeing a giant-like human being, covered in lots and lots of hair, with a pyramid-shaped head and overlong arms. I knew it was a Bigfoot. By all accounts, Sunbeam was so thrilled to see her. He was nuzzling her affectionately with his nose. She was talking to him in a strange language that sounded like an ancient dialect. Inatikana, hopokolana, ijava silo. Suddenly things made perfect sense to me. I'd often returned to the stable block to find that someone had plaited both of our horses' manes. My father thought it was me. I thought it was my father. It was a long-standing joke between the two of us as to who was the guilty party, sneakily plaiting the horses' manes. Now I knew who the mystery platter was. Until this point in time, I had been very undecided and non-committal about Bigfoot. I wasn't so cynically scathing that I didn't believe such a creature could actually exist in North America, as it's a very large place, so it wasn't beyond the bounds of impossibility. Yet if Bigfoot was real, I'd never envisaged for a single moment that one would ultimately cross my path one day. I think to Sunbeam the Bigfoot was as human to her as I probably was. I was very confounded by what I was beholding. I'm certain my mouth was hanging wide open, like a loose straw in your kitchen, and my astounded eyes were as wide as saucers. I sat there on the saddle, wondering if this was just an illusory, fantabulous dream, from which I would surely awaken. But this was no dream. In that poignant, indelible moment, the Bigfoot looked right up into my eyes, and there was a warm, stirring feeling in my heart. I was never afraid of her, not even for a transient second. You can always tell what someone's heart is like by the way they interact with other animals. The Bigfoot treated Sunbeam like a beloved friend. I'd say at a guess, she was about 8.5 foot tall, 800 pounds in weight. She was remarkably human-looking in her body shape and her facial features, although her face was exceedingly well chiselled, with defined cheekbones and an angular jawline. She had a prominent forehead that was heavily wrinkled, but her deep-set, treacle-coloured eyes were as dark as my horse's were. She had a gentle benevolence and warmth about her, but I've often found big creatures to be very kind. Everything about this Bigfoot was humongous. Her hands, her feet, her shoulders, and the Herculean dimensions of her muscular body. The Bigfoot spoke to me in her language that was immediately translated into my head, and I could understand everything she was saying. I think it was some kind of telepathic communication of some kind. Hiposha kisa fono bona, ilani sila shikasa, ho bona alinanog, o mogola kina kata. So we finally meet. Your horse told me all about you, how you saved him. He tells me he wants to save you too. Ishokona basa, hitola balikala, ivo boshono. That's why he brought you to me. He wanted me to help you. You've lost your way a little. You need a nudge in the right direction. Oboki, onolani, ifoshola sana, omolilana. The Bigfoot seems to look at me, as if she's literally rifling through the files of my mind. Ilaki lia como, anasanasi, opukachata katalani, no shaki sinavo. You're a beautiful soul, she told me. Why would you try to harm yourself? You are here for a reason. You have a job to do. Everyone is here for a reason. No one is here by random chance. Surely you must know that. I was gobsmacked. How do you know I tried to harm myself? I stammered. How can you possibly know that? You don't even know me. Amakina top, atila casino, akila mojanasi, ha fokolona zinalon, ijaki la guala. I can see many things that you can't, the Bigfoot told me. I know things and can read minds. You must never attempt to harm yourself again, young lady. That's a very foolish thing for you to do. Your life is a precious gift. You must remember that. You are a treasured soul that is unconditionally loved and cherished. But you don't understand. People were being mean to me, saying horrible things about me. You wouldn't know what it's like to live in my kind of world. You live in the trees. No one judges you like they judge me. But in my world, Everybody judges you. You don't escape being judged. One is never good enough, thin enough, pretty enough, clever enough. One is just never enough. Mokola kita vonolak, ishogo bolagilana, ho vashwakanasa. I understand more than you know. I know many of your kind can be cruel, with hearts as cold as ice. Those that are like that are the ones that are truly lost. If someone is unkind to you, it's because they're hurting on the inside. Meanness does not come from a happy, contented person or happy, contented place. It doesn't come from someone who knows themselves either. It comes from a wounded person who doesn't know who they are. They are the ones struggling to find the light. Feel sorry for them. They deserve your pity, for they are well and truly lost. Ikaso bola jina, ho vo honak, igala ko bagasa. What they think of you is of no concern of yours. Look at me. Do I care what anybody thinks about me? Of course not. I can certainly succeed in scaring things away from me, based on my huge size and the intimidating way I look. But I'm not bothered about that. Absolutely not. You live your life in peace, and the peace will surely follow you. It always does. Peace cannot exist in conflict, any more than conflict can exist in peace. But it's always the good that will override the evil, as the light will always conquer the darkness. Don't ever forget that. O catalano, o javila gila, ho bakasala, ijovagina lona. The Bigfoot spoke some words to my horse, who seemed to understand. She nodded and watched us trotting away. She called after me again, Hiko basivo, abasivo. Remain in your peace. And she was gone. The following week I returned to school. I was determined I was going to follow the Bigfoot's advice. I was going to live in peace, and any cruel, heartless words thrown in my direction would become like water off a duck's back to me. I was surprised how many people welcomed me back in my class, and several girls actually came up to me to apologize for their former behavior towards me. I'm so glad you're back, they told me. I'm also sorry if I said anything horrible to you that might have hurt you at any time. Even though most people were kind to me, there were a couple of girls who sniggered at me. One said to me, Pity you didn't kill yourself. You're a real slapper, sending a topless picture of yourself to Fletcher. I mean, how desperate can you get? I straightened my back up and said, It might be a pity to you that I'm not dead, but I for one am very glad I'm alive. If you think I'm a slapper, that's your problem, not mine. I know I'm not. If you can finally refrain from trying to talk down to me, I'd be very much obliged by that. There's a bathroom down the corridor. You might consider washing your dirty mouths out with soap and water, because from where I'm standing, they look very, very dirty. The two girls looked at me with open mouths, unable to believe that I had the guts to challenge them, and from that point on, they never belittled me again. I soon became a popular pupil at that school, and much like my brother, no one would have dared say a mean thing to me again. As for the first time in my life, I stood up for myself. But I also no longer cared what anybody thought. I was determined to grab peace with both of my hands and to live each day to the fullest, and I did. To cut a long story short, I really believe that my horse Sunbeam reached out to the Bigfoot in order for me to receive some much-needed advice that changed my life. It is the same advice I give to my own children today. And believe it or not, the young boy I sent my topless picture to is now my husband, and we're very happily married. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.